Welcome to Treasure Mountain, the podcast that inspires and guides us to find the treasure within human experience. I'm your host, Sol Hanna. Joining us on this episode is a return guest, Ajahn Kovilo, who's joining us from Dharma Realm Buddhist University in California. Ajahn Kovilo is an Ohio-born monk who, having been introduced to meditation through the Goenka tradition, first entered the monastery in 2006. After receiving full ordination from Ajahn Pasanno and Ajahn Amaro at Abhayagiri Buddhist Monastery in California in 2010, Ajahn Kovilo spent the next decade training at monasteries in the Ajahn Chah tradition in America and Thailand. In 2020, after a year practicing at a Pa Auk Sayadaw monastery in Myanmar, Ajahn Kovilo enrolled at the Dharma Realm Buddhist University in Ukiah, California, where he is currently studying Pali and Sanskrit, among other courses. Until the end of his formal studies, Ajahn Kovilo will be participating in the growing Clear Mountain Monastery community, remotely and during the winter and summer breaks. After finishing his studies, Ajahn Kovilo will join the rest of the community in person and on a more regular basis. Ajahn Kovilo is joining us today to discuss an institution that is often misunderstood in Western countries, even by practicing Buddhists in the West. That is, the Sangha, the community of ordained bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, monks and nuns. There are some in the West who say that we don't even need a Sangha. But there is no denying that the Sangha was an integral feature of the Buddha Sasana from the very beginning. And indeed, to be a Buddhist is to have taken personal refuge with the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha. So what do we mean by Sangha? And more importantly, what is it for? Join us in finding out more about the meaning and purpose of the Sangha with Ajahn Kovilo as we seek for the treasure within. Welcome to Treasure Mountain, Ajahn. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks. It's good to be here with you, Saul. Yeah, and talking about the Sangha, exciting topic, perhaps.
Yeah, I think it's an exciting topic. I think it's an important topic. I just wanted to quickly ask you, though, how has your experience been so far at Dharma Realm Buddhist University? How are you finding that that experience?
It's been. Yeah, it's not quite what I expected. I don't know what I expected, going from living for, 10, 12 years at a forest monastery, having very intentionally, many people will leave a university setting to come to a forest monastery. And that's what I did as well. And then, just having this idea that, I wanted my holy life, my life in robes to be sustainable, and thinking that, the meditation monastery that I was staying at, meditating 8-9 hours a day was just not sustainable. So what could I do to elongate my holy life and hopefully stay for my whole life in robes? And I'm just drawn to study. And so moved into the university with that idea in mind. And it's certainly very common in Buddhist countries. You've got whole Buddhist universities. You've got 2 huge Buddhist universities with virtually all monk monastic students. In Thailand and also in Sri Lanka, Burma. And so coming into it, and I thought the lessons that I would be getting would be more focused around language. That's a big focus and interest of mine, Pali and Sanskrit. And I'm finding that it's, it being a Mahayana Buddhist university, Chinese Mahayana in the Xuanhua school, that the lessons that I'm learning are not ones that I actually was intending on learning from the whole experience, but are quite profound, actually, really being tested and pushed with my own views. Like, how do I hold on to my Theravada views? And in the face of, I won't say Mahayana opposition, but sometimes it could feel like that, just in these classes where it seems like there are certain concepts which are different from what I'm used to in Theravada. And that's been great because it's really, forced me to get a hold of how what I believe what I think is Theravada doctrine and how I'm holding on to that. And that's really healthy, I think.
Well, I got to say, I'm really glad that you're joining us and that you have that experience of having spent over 10 years in a meditation monastery. And now you've got also the academic, the study background, especially for dealing with this topic that we've got today, which is trying to understand the meaning and purpose of the Sangha. And I think a good place to start is to get a clearer understanding of what we mean by the word Sangha.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's I do believe it is in the Oxford English Dictionary by now, but it's probably not in the vocabulary of most non-Buddhist or non-Hindu Western people. So basically, it's the third of the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. It's typically framed as being of two different levels. You've got the Arya Sangha, so these are the disciples of the Buddha who are enlightened, whether that's bhikkhus or bhikkhunis, male or female monastics, or lay people, male or female. That's the noble Sangha. And then you've got a level of the Sangha, which is just the traditional or conventional Sangha, the monastic Sangha. That's us, all of us in robes, bhikkhus, bhikkhunis. We are the traditional Sangha, so not all of us are enlightened. It's probably a rather small proportion, most likely. But this is a different level of Sangha. And then you've also got, a big question which comes up in Western circles is that when Buddhism was coming to the West, this idea of Sangha as the third jewel, the third refuge, was being talked about, but there wasn't yet any kind of foundation of a monastic system. So people started, so what do we take refuge in if there are no people in robes, nobody who are, professional practitioners of this religion, of this teaching? So that the word started being used in lay contexts. So a lay Sangha, and this is very common in pretty much, I think, most Western countries. I don't think it's used in that way in Thailand or in other, it might be to some extent in Sri Lanka, but yeah, that's a unique way it's used in the West. And I don't actually think it's, the word at the time, there were instances talking about Amiga Sangha, so a Sangha of deer, or a Deva Sangha, a Sangha of Devas, so talking about an Upasaka Sangha, a group of Upasakas or lay people. I don't think it's, totally inappropriate, and if it kind of brings some unity to one's practice.
I did want to ask you about that, though, because maybe I'm incorrect about this, but I thought that there was a slightly different interpretation from Theravada and Mahayana in terms of what the Sangha is. Is that correct?
It's a good question. I think it differs depending on the different schools. So I know Nichiren Buddhism, which is a Mahayana sect based out of Japan. They very much have their kind of their school's belief that Sangha is just monastics. And similarly, in this Master Hua Mahayana, Chinese Mahayana tradition, it's very much Sangha is just monastics, and there are papers written and monks speaking very explicitly about how it's just the monastic community. But yeah, I don't think there's a general distinction. Yeah.
No, I really appreciate that, because I was wondering about that, the origin, because I saw it, I don't see it so much in Australia, but I notice in discussions, particularly in the United States, that there's this idea of a lay Sangha as well. I didn't realize the origin of it. How long? Well, let's get a basic question out of the way. How long has the Sangha been around now?
Well, the Sangha has been around since the earliest days of since the Buddha's enlightenment. So roughly 2,600 years ago, the Buddha attained enlightenment. That was the full moon day in July. That was called Visakha Puja. That's celebrated now. And then roughly a month later, a month after that, the Buddha was enlightened. It could have been 2 months But the Buddha was enlightened, stayed around the Bodhi tree at Bodh Gaya, just conceiving, how could I possibly teach this to anyone else? And then he conceives that actually, at first he's a bit disheartened, thinks, this is so subtle, can't teach, no one's going to get this. But then he thinks, oh, actually, there are people who have little dust in their eyes, and the story of the god Sahampati coming down and inviting him to teach, there are people with little dust. And he actually looks with his Buddha eye and says, oh, there are these 5 former friends of mine, and I can go and teach them. And he walks to Varanasi, where he teaches the Dhammacakka Sutta on Asala Puja. I believe it's 2 months after Visakha. And that was the birth, when he taught that turning the wheel in motion Dhammacakka Sutta. Then Anya Kondanya became a stream enterer, and all these devas rejoiced, and that was the birth of the Arya Sangha.
Okay. Well, let's go to the next. I think it's one of our core questions is, why do you think the Buddha started the Sangha in the first place? And I think you've given us a little bit of context about how after his enlightenment, there was this sense of, well, how can anybody understand this? And spending some time reflecting on how to teach. But one of the first things he does is starts the Sangha. So why do you think he did that?
Well, there are a number of principles which the Buddha points to, which are demonstrating this importance of friendship, of community, of the Dhamma into the world. So in terms of these 3 refuges, or the triple jewels, you've got the Buddha, that's enlightenment, and then you've got the Dhamma, that's his teachings on enlightenment, the Buddha's teachings, and then the Sangha is that moving out from the heart, from the truth, from realization of the way things are, into the world. And all of us, even the most reclusive monk or nun, or whatever kind of ascetic, just living by themselves, you have to interact with the other people. And the Buddha realized this, and it was just natural that if he's going to teach, he needs to teach someone. And for all of us who are much less further along the path than he was, we're all still kind of struggling along. Having friends is very important. And so this is the principle, the famous quote from Ananda, or from the Buddha to Ananda. Ananda says, oh, spiritual friendship, Kalyana Mitta's beautiful friendship, that's half of the holy life. And Buddha comes back with the punchline that, no, it's not. Don't say that, Ananda. That's spiritual friendship is the whole of the holy life. So, and I feel like what the Sangha does is create a group of people who are the symbol of the highest form of that. So when one really wants to get serious about their practice, inspired by the Dhamma, inspired by the Buddha, then it makes sense to surround oneself with people who have similar goals and can help one around with one's path. So.
Also, I just wanted to ask as well, what does the role of the Vinya, the monastic discipline, because in some ways I feel like that defines the Sangha. Obviously you're wearing a robe, and that's in a symbolic sense, but it's much more than that, isn't it? It's a set of practices and a way of life.
This is very true. Yeah, so just a bit of background. The Vinya, these are all of the Buddhist given regulations for the bhikkhus and the bhikkhunis, people who've voluntarily decided to ordain into his order. And, we take very strict rules. We can't kill. If we kill another human, no longer a monk. If we steal in specific ways, if we steal, commit, have sex, if we lie about spiritual attainment, we're no longer monks and nuns. So very strict rules, and we're taking this on ourselves. And then a bunch of other rules. We've got 227 main ones for monks, but then just all sorts of minor rules. And the purpose of the Vinya, the etymology of the word ni is the root, and that means to lead. And V is, in this instance, to lead out. So these are rules which lead outward. It's this principle of discipline equals freedom. So many people, when they first come into Buddhism, perhaps through meditation, really inspired. These are teachings on the highest liberation. We love freedom. Freedom is great. That's what people want in the West. That's what everybody wants. But it seems, how does it make any sense to take on all these rules? How are holding on to rules going to enlighten someone? And that's really the paradox, which as monks and nuns, as people who are trying to live this path, this is the paradox of our life, that we have to kind of figure out, how do we find freedom within all of these constraints. And it's a creative challenge, and it can be quite beautiful, but that's definitely the point. And there's actually, the Buddha gave 10 reasons why he laid down the monastic rules, which are quite fascinating. The first was for the excellence of the Sangha, for the support of the Sangha, for the restraining of, kind of, some translations are impudent, or basically like monks who are kind of shameless. So for curbing, shameless monks who just want to do whatever they want to do, and for supporting monks who really want to get down to the practice, for inspiring faith in those who don't yet have faith, for increasing the faith of people who already have faith, for decreasing or for the restraint of asavas, or mental outflows, unwholesome states of mind in this life. So by keeping all these rules, it's a check on all of the kind of troubles of mind and body and community that can come when we break these things, and in future lives. And then finally, the Buddha gave it for the comfort of the Sangha, the establishment of the true Dhamma, and the long life of the Vinya. So it wasn't just for other people, it was for oneself, it was for the community of monks, it was for the community of lay people, and it's for the long life of his teachings. So it's a really neat list.
Wow, yeah, that is a great list. I haven't heard that before, and it really does outline things very clearly. And thanks also for that point about the Vinya, which, because in Western society we worship freedom, we think that's the highest thing, but the idea of freedom is just doing whatever you want, whenever you want. And this is a very different conception of freedom. This is like almost like being free from wanting, which is, you have to train to get to that point, don't you? So that's a very powerful point. I did want to ask, when we take refuge in the Sangha, and of course both lay people and monks and nuns do take refuge in the Sangha, what are we taking refuge in?
It's a great question. So you can see it in terms of the 3 levels of Sangha that I mentioned. And so those 3 are basically in the noble Arya Sangha, so people who are enlightened to some level. In the traditional Sangha, if the monks and nuns who are wearing robes. Even if you wanted to allow this lay idea of a Sangha, your Kalyanamitta. And then on an even more fundamental level is the reflection of Sangha within our own hearts. So this is a level which doesn't really get talked about much, but I think it's very important. It's almost the most important, in that the Buddha recommended Sanghanusati. Anusati is recollection of the Sangha, not just imagining or visualizing those people who we believe are enlightened, Ajahn Mun, or all of the disciples of the Buddha, Mahamoggallana, Sariputra, people alive today who we think are enlightened, just thinking about these people. But it can be something much, much deeper and more personal, almost this, the place in the heart when you are practicing mindfulness of mind, this place where you notice that the boundaries between inside and outside. So I might do a a brief guided meditation later, but because that might not be immediately clear. But yeah, there's multiple levels of taking refuge in the Sangha, taking refuge in that noble Sangha. If you can find someone who you believe is noble, and again, you can't know noble Arya, someone who's enlightened to different degrees, has gotten rid of greed, anger, and delusion to different levels, then associating with them is wonderful. And the Buddha praised that association with such people all over the place. Even just seeing such people is great. But again, that's somewhat of a instrumental. You can't. Even if I had arhats around me all the time, and even if I wanted to be with them all the time, they're going to shoo me away. At certain points, it gets annoying to have somebody like following you around. The Buddha himself did that. There was a case with a monk just kind of following him and just adoring his body. But, yeah, so you can take refuge in someone who you think are enlightened, or you can take refuge with a monk or nun, and that's done in different ways, in different traditions. You can take refuge with the Buddha statue. Monastics in the Ajahn Chah tradition that I'm familiar with, we bow so many times throughout the day. We bow first thing in the morning. It's the Buddha, it's the Dhamma, and it's to the Sangha. And when we're alone in our beds in the morning, or before we go to bed at night, bowing again 3 more times, Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. That really is pointing to, what is the Sangha when we're all alone, just bowing to, no one else is in the room. What are we bowing to? And what is this Sangha internally? So
I did want to ask you that, because I know obviously it's very common in Buddhist countries, but for many Westerners, when they first come across Buddhism, they feel a bit uncomfortable with this frequent bowing down, not just to the statue, but also they see us bowing down to monks and nuns. What is the meaning of, and what is the value of paying respects to the Sangha for lay people, as well as for monastics? What is the value of doing that, do you think?
Yeah, thanks for bringing this up. I mean, it's such a sticky point for many people. You come to a monastery, especially if you're coming to a monastery in the West, and there are, maybe people from Thailand who want to show the newly come Westerners like how to bow, or even like putting their hands on their backs and like doing a kind of assisted bow. That can be very it can rankle many people, but there are so many benefits from learning how to bow, and learning how to bow to these different things, and exploring what that might mean internally for oneself, because that's really what it's all about. I mean, all the monasteries I've lived at, it's totally optional. Monks, we're not, or at least I'm not, just staring like who's bowing and who's not, taking score, because it really doesn't matter to me. I don't get any extra points when somebody bows, and and actually, from the monk's point of view, we have to be careful. There's a pretty extreme sutta where the Buddha said that if a monk, when being bowed to, takes that as reason to make a self and be elated with that receiving of praise, then it would be better for a monk to basically wrap themselves in like a heated iron blanket. So basically like a totally dukkha-filled hellish experience, than to accept praise in kind of a self-forming way. So pretty strong words, and monks and nuns, we do have to be careful of that. But from us bowing, or from lay people bowing, it really is, an immediate value is just humility, learning that, or at least believing that there's something, hopefully those first 2 refuges, bowing to the Buddha, the Dhamma, or at least bowing to the Sangha, or to the Dhamma, believing, okay, there's something which I hold up higher than myself. And in starting with that, starting with the Dhamma, you can bow to the Dhamma 3 times if you want. But maybe then working from there. Okay, I respect this quality. Okay, peace. I'm not as peaceful as I can be. The Dhamma teaches supreme peace. Okay, I'm not as happy as I can be. The Dhamma teaches highest happiness. Letting go, all these things. I can bow down to that. I can put my head to the ground and literally make this this gesture, and doing it not just as a performative statement in a group, but when it becomes a whole different thing when you do it when no one's watching. And how do you bow when no one's watching? And what can you learn from that? I mean, is it just a silly gesture? How is it any more silly than anything else that we do? Any kind of other stretch or yoga pose that people do? It's on one level, it's just a movement of the body. And if you get into like these more elaborate forms of bowing, like the Chinese 3 steps, 1 bow, which is basically getting on your knees and doing a kind of half bow on the ground, or the Tibetan style, basically full length prostration, it becomes an exercise. You know, you're getting some movement with the body. So lots of benefits, and work up from the Dhamma, then you can probably get some faith in the Buddha, and then, okay, maybe there are some people, and that's a big leap. That's a big psychological shift. I mean, Westerners, we didn't grow up believing that, other than those of us who were raised Christian, that a human could attain divinity, and Jesus was kind of an outlier because he was the Son of God. But we don't have this idea of humans attaining enlightenment and okay, maybe the Buddha, but this idea that other people can do it too. And not just other people at the time of the Buddha, but that possibly, and this is the faith of, it's my own faith, and it's the faith of many others, that there are still living masters who have put an end to greed, anger, and delusion in their own mind. And just bowing to that, I've got images of my favorite Ajahns on my shrine. It's not just the Buddha that I'm bowing to. It's lots of different Ajahns in my shrine.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's such a powerful point that you're making, is that bowing is totally optional. No one is requiring it. You can go to a Buddhist monastery or a temple. No one requires it. The people who are bowing are choosing to do it. And they're bowing down to when they bow to the Sangha, it's to those noble qualities, which you mentioned, like putting an end to greed, hatred, and delusion, totally clearing the mind and having pure wisdom. That is such a rare thing in our world today, to venerate those qualities. This brings me to, I think, really just the big question of this interview, which is, what is the purpose? Ultimately, what is the purpose of the Sangha? And you've spoken a bit about what it represents, but also, I mean, in terms of the Arya Sangha, the noble ones, but most of the Sangha aren't Arya. Yet, and you've spoken about the importance of friendship, but it's more than that as well, isn't it? It's a vehicle for training. What else can we say about what is the purpose of having a Sangha in the 21st century?
Yeah, the purpose of having a conventional, traditional Sangha of people who are not wearing normal clothes, but are just wrapped in robes and shaven heads. Great question. And I mean, just speaking from a personal point of view, or the point of view of many people who are inclined to this lifestyle themselves. So there are many people, and the numbers just seem to be increasing, who are disillusioned with the dreams that are put forth in the media, or are even put forth in deep works of literature. The traditional values of, certainly American values and consumerist values, belief in dreams of wealth, having wealth as one's highest refuge. This kind of goal, which is not even questioned in so many in so many circles, having that as one's foundation in life, just becomes so hollow. And seeing that there exists an institution. And yeah, institution, the word itself, has gotten a bad name because of all of the corruptions that can happen to any institution and have happened to religious institutions, including the Buddhist Sangha in different ways at different times. But just having this group of people, and hopefully you can find a local Sangha that, or at least in the same country. You might have to go to the opposite end of the country, which I and many others did in America. But an inspiring group of people who, even if they're not enlightened, share similar goals. And yeah, going from, well, first jumping from, a rather just pleasure-seeking life. The word pleasure-seeking is not really even a compound which is used that often, just because it's the default principle for most people in their lives. But then in America, with enough, it's fairly easy, a middle-class lifestyle. You just get enough, and then once you've got, enough money, enough food, and you just start eating more food and going to more movies and consuming more live streams, and it just doesn't satisfy in the same way. And then having the idea and the actuality of a group of people who are trying something different, who voluntarily give away their cell phones. Just that is impressive. And being able then, for those people who found a monastery that they're inspired with, then the option of they themselves entering into that and then giving up the things we give up in order to gain the things that we're given and that we're working towards is just such a amazing thing in the world, and extremely unique. Theravada Buddhist monasteries didn't really exist in America before at least with Western abbots who could explain different concepts to people, say, much before the 80s, so if not later.
Yeah, that's a very, very powerful point, and I love that way of expressing it. Like, I think for us living in the West, that pleasure seeking as a default, when we don't even think about it, it is just like, of course that's what you do. But then even just seeing a monk or a nun and their lifestyle, it's like a question arises in the mind. Well, why would you do that? And it's a clear alternative. And I think that's one of the beauties is for lay people is that, well, there is that alternative. And I could perhaps go on a retreat, and that's living like a monk or a nun for a short time, or maybe I'll go the whole way and try it out and see if I like it. But I did also just want to ask, there is this ancient tradition, which of course continues today, which is that lay people support the monastics. In fact, the monastics are based on the Vinya, are independence on the lay people for food and for all of their necessities. What is the value of that for lay people?
Well, for lay people who want to ordain, it's almost a necessary prerequisite. You have to live at the monastery and kind of draw near to the monks if you want to ordain. For people who either don't want to ordain or have life circumstances that don't permit them to ordain, it's just a great chance to draw near to monastics. Oftentimes the way that alms round is carried out in the West, like Ajahn Nisabo, myself up in Seattle, Ajahn Nisabo right now, while I'm in school, he's going alms round every day.
Really?
And
wow.
Alms round 6 days a week. 6 days a week. Into Pike's Place Market near the original Starbucks. But basically the way it's done in the West is he goes and stands outside of a market, and people know where he's going to be, and people come. He usually doesn't have an idea of who all is going to come, but people do come, and it's actually a chance to speak Dhamma, a chance for people to actually talk to someone who's trying to immerse themselves in the Buddha's teachings. In Thailand or a Buddhist country, oftentimes almsround is a totally silent affair. Not even in many monasteries. Monks don't even chant a blessing. So they'll basically walk by with their alms bowls. People put food in their bowls, and they don't even stop. They just keep walking, and that's the correct thing in that cultural circle. But in the West, people just don't know enough about monks for, to have a monk just receive food and then for the monk to continue on without saying a word. It could happen, but conditions have to be quite specific for that. But it's a chance in the West, to speak with someone who's studied the Dhamma, has been living the Dhamma, practicing meditation for a long time, keeping precepts for a long time, someone who's been meditating on death, someone who has a different perspective from the world. They're not glued into all of the media that most people are looking at every day. Their attachments with all sorts of attachments are much less. It's a very different world inside of the Sangha, and to be able to interact with someone who's in a very different subculture than you are, a very different environment, you can learn a lot from such a person. So you can talk, and even just the act of giving food, even if you don't say a word to the monk, it's just a beautiful opportunity, which is sad that it's not more widely practiced and available in the West. I was visiting my grandfather a number of years ago before he passed away, and it was a really beautiful time. I was staying at my grandmother and grandfather's for 2 months just before he died, and my grandma loved it. She would make me food, put it, offer it to me every day, and she just loved it. And you see this in Buddhist countries when someone has retired, especially if their kids have moved to Bangkok, their kids have moved away, not to mention America, where the whole society is so separated. You've got, my grandma was in Tennessee, and the rest of my family was in California or Washington, or all over the place. And, just having this contact where, say the grandma in Thailand, there's at times 300,000 monks in Thailand, and many of them going alms round every day. The grandma, if her kids don't live around, she maybe has physical conditions, he or she has physical conditions that prevent them from continuing to work in the fields or work in their jobs the same way they used to. But still, they can cook a little bit of sticky rice at early in the morning, and then come outside, and the first act you do during the day is to put some food into somebody else's bowl. And the fascinating thing is that it makes you rich, or it makes you not poor automatically. If you're giving something to someone, even if you're living in like some of the places, the shacks, the huts, the sheds that people lived in some of the places that I've lived in Thailand, that these forest monasteries are at. I mean, people in the West have no idea what material poverty can look like. But then to have someone who lives in a shed with just a corrugated metal roof to come out and put food in your bowl, it's totally flipped. How are they poor? If they've got enough to give, then how are they the ones who are poor? And it just can totally shift one's own perception of oneself. And it's very humbling for the monks. It's a good lesson. Like, am I doing what I need to do? Am I practicing the teachings to be worth this ball of sticky rice, to be worth this? Well, I mean, you come to the West, or affluent monasteries, and it's just total abundance of food. So are we worth this? And so lots of different purposes and benefits from offering alms and associating with the Sangha.
And I think you've really hit on a really valuable point, is the joy that arises from giving, which is just so powerful, and you see it again and again. And I think that Westerners sometimes miss it. And I did just want to share one story that came to mind very briefly, which was the Dalai Lama had a Westerner who was doing translations for him, and she was obviously part of his entourage. And at one point in Dharamsala in India, there was this Tibetan woman, and she bowed down and with a great deal of veneration, and she gave the Dalai Lama a skirt. And she's clearly very, very poor, and she gave the Dalai Lama a skirt, like a dress. And this woman was like, what? How can you possibly, it's like it was insulting to her way of thinking. This woman is so poor. How can you accept this skirt? It's just probably like one or two or three that she has. And you're accepting it from her. You should say no. And she said this to the Dalai Lama afterwards, and he says, yes, you're right. She was very poor, but she needed to give. And that's the point. And I think we often miss that, is that the happiness and joy which arises from giving, even if you have just a little, it's actually, I think what you said before, just to be able to give that little bit, all of a sudden you're rich in a spiritual sense.
That's a really beautiful story. And thank you for highlighting how giving can lead to joy. But even just this recollection of the Sangha can lead to joy. Whether it's the noble Sangha, I know many people, myself included, who at times like thinking about the kindness of a teacher we've met, or even a teacher we haven't met. Many people will think of their Ajahn, who might not even still be alive, but just like tears of joy and thanks come to mind. And similarly, the Buddha said that recollection of Sangha can lead to pamoja, which is gladness, which then leads to piti, or rapture, which then leads to bodily calm, which then leads to sukha, or happiness. And from that happiness, the mind can become concentrated and see things the way they are. So this is a very explicit mention in the texts of how thinking of the Sangha, bringing the Sangha into one's heart, experiencing this can lead to better and better joy, and then joy plus into samadhi. So
I think this would be an excellent place in which to conclude our interview. You did mention earlier about that idea of Sangha Nusati, recollection of the Sangha. Could you give us some guidance as to how we might practice Sangha Nusati?
Yeah, maybe I'll just do a quick, maybe 3 or 5 minute guided meditation, just exploring this principle of Sangha being the Dhamma when it moves out into the world. So sitting or standing in a stable posture. Now, bring your attention to your right hand and wiggle your right finger. So feel your hand and your finger from the inside and wiggle your right finger. And then look down, and your finger actually is wiggling. There's an accurate relationship between what it feels like in your mind and what your body is actually doing. Bring your attention to your left hand. Feel it from the inside. Now bring your attention to your heart. And not just think about your heart, but actually let the mind drop into this cavity in the upper chest. And feel the warmth there. And then with the eyes closed, just see if you can feel a boundary. Can you feel the front of your chest? Where do you stop and where does the world begin? In the back? Is there any clear demarcation? Is there any enclosement? Any clear marker of what is inside and what is outside? And experiencing this, seeing that from a first-person perspective, it feels like we're living in a cloud. The mind is not restricted, seemingly, within the skin. And feeling this, just allow the mind to play and stay there at this border this bordering, or this non-border of internal and external. And this is one way to conceive of Sangha. It's that which is in contact with the external world. It's that which mingles with outside. And you can just start from here. Start from the heart and just play with the boundaries or the boundarylessness of the body and the heart, and bring a teacher, a friend, Kalyanamitta, a bhikkhu, bhikshuni, bhikkhuni. Bring them to mind and just let that concept, that idea, let it just mingle with your heart sense, your open-hearted awareness. And let the space be filled with gratitude. And then take that into your day. And that's a way of trying to live Sanghanusati, basically coming from the heart, coming into the world with gratitude, and having this relationship, knowing that there is this relationship in your heart between yourself and your highest goal and its lived manifestation. So,
Thank you very kindly, Ajahn, for coming with us onto this interview and outlining the meaning and purpose of the Sangha. Thank you very kindly.
Yeah, thank you, Saul.
Thank you to all our listeners for joining us for this inspiring episode of Treasure Mountain, in which we took a deeper understanding of the meaning and purpose of the Sangha with Ajahn Kovilo. If you enjoy this podcast, I'd appreciate if you could share this episode with your friends or other people who you think could benefit from its sage advice. And don't forget to click the follow button on your podcast app so that you get the latest episodes turning up in your stream. Treasure Mountain Podcast is part of the Everyday Dharma Network. You can find out more about the Treasure Mountain Podcast by going to the link in the show notes for this episode. You can also find out on the Treasure Mountain website information about previous episodes and guests, as well as transcriptions of our interviews. And if you go back to the everydaydharma.net homepage, you can discover more about the 3 other podcasts on the network and links to subscribe to any and all of them too. I hope you'll join us again for our next episode of Treasure Mountain Podcast as we seek for the treasure within.